If you walked down Oldham Street in the 70s, you'd feel it before you saw it. That mix of cigarette smoke, damp air, and the faint buzz of a jukebox from somewhere you couldn't quite place. It was the heart of what we now call the Northern Quarter, although back then it was just the scruffier end of town, where everything worth finding was half hidden. Shop fronts were packed in tight, windows cluttered with whatever could be sold, second-hand coats, old records, maybe a few boxes of mismatched shoes stacked outside. The paint always peeling, but that didn't matter. It had character. You'd see kids hanging around in parkas and flares, hair a bit too long, pretending not to look at each other while waiting for mates. A transistor radio somewhere playing Bowie or T-Rex, the music bouncing off brick walls and puddles. The city had this rhythm then, not fast, not slow, just steady. Everyone moved with purpose, even if the purpose was just getting to the chippy before it shot. Oldham Street was where people came to look cool before cool had a price tag. You had places selling army surplus, leather jackets, old jeans that had already lived one life before starting another. If you were skin, you could still walk out of there looking like you belonged in a band, and half the people did. There was always a bit of edge too. You'd keep an eye out, watch your bag, not to the lads outside the record shop, but never stare too long. It wasn't dangerous, exactly, just alive. The kind of place where something was always happening, even if you didn't know what. And the sound of it, that's what people remember. The clatter of boots on wet pavements, the hiss of bosses slowing down, a burst of laughter from a doorway. It's strange how a street could feel like an entire world. Oldham Street did. Still does, in a way. Market Street was the heartbeat. Loud, bright, always full. Saturdays were the big ones. Families shoulder to shoulder, bags knocking together, kids trailing behind eating paper cones of chips. You'd hear the buskers first, the same songs every week, but no one minded. You had Lewis's on one end, Woolworths on the other, and everything in between. Windows dressed up with clothes you couldn't afford but loved looking at. The air smelled like perfume from the department stores mixed with fried onions from a stall nearby. Piccadilly Gardens was where you'd stop to rest. The pigeons were everywhere, bold as brass, nicking crumbs right out of your hand. Office workers ate their sandwiches on benches. Teenagers met there before heading off to the Arndale or the Odeon. The fountains looked better in memory than they ever did in person. Half the time they were switched off, but it didn't matter. That whole area had a pulse. If you were meeting someone, if you were going anywhere, chances are you passed through Market Street first. It wasn't glamorous, but it was Manchester. Noisy, stubborn, and full of life. Deansgate always felt a bit more grown up. The buildings stood taller, their stone darkened by years of rain and bus fumes, and the street carried this quiet confidence, like it remembered when Manchester was the workshop of the world. You'd see people in their Sunday best heading towards Kendall's with that air of purpose only department store shopping could give. The windows were immaculate, handbags, gloves, perfume bottles that sparkled even on grey days. Just down the way, smaller shops clung on between the big names, a watch repairer, a tobacconist, a place selling umbrellas because, well, it's Manchester. The trams had long gone by then, replaced by a steady stream of buses and cars that always seemed slightly too close to the curb. The street echoed with tyres on wet tarmac and the occasional shout of a driver leaning out his window. If you wandered far enough down, towards the viaducts and the river, the tone shifted, the polish faded, the pavements cracked, and the noise softened to that low industrial hum. Deansgate had both worlds in one, the city's proud face at one end and its rough hands at the other. You didn't need to be told Manchester worked hard. You could see it just by walking that street. You could always tell when you were getting close to Ancoats. The air thickened, a bit of soot, a hint of oil, that damp cotton smell drifting out from the mills. Rows of red brick terraces stood shoulder to shoulder, washing lines stretched across back alleys like bunting. It wasn't fancy, but it was alive. The mills still rattled through the day back then, though fewer each year. You'd hear the clatter of machines long before you saw them, and the women coming out after their shifts, faces shiny from the heat, scarves tied tight against the wind. They'd stop for a chat by the corner shop, grab a loaf, then head home to get the tea on. Kids made the streets their playgrounds, football against walls, chalk drawings on the pavement, that hollow echo of a ball bouncing off brick. Every doorway smelt of stewing mince or boiling cabbage, and the sound of the radio drifted from open windows, mostly the BBC or Piccadilly radio if you were lucky enough to get it clear. It wasn't easy living, but people looked after each other. If someone was short on bread, the neighbour sorted it. If a kid fell, there were 10 mums ready with plasters. Ancoats had a toughness that wasn't about swagger, it was survival with a smile. And even as the mills started falling quiet, the spirit stayed loud. It always did. On a Saturday afternoon, Moss Side felt like it had its own weather, warmer somehow, thick with the smell of cooking and the hum of voices drifting down the terraces. Neighbours lingered on doorsteps, chatting. Cars pulled up with music still playing through half-open windows, and kids darted across the road chasing a football that had seen better days. Shops along Claremont Road were small but lively. Hairdressers, groceries, record stalls. You could get a patty and a bottle of ting, then stand outside arguing about football while the shopkeeper called out prices over the noise. Everyone seemed to know everyone. It wasn't an easy time. Money was short. The police were about too often, and the houses were crumbling. But life carried on with its own kind of pride. The sound systems rolled out on weekends, bass shaking the windows, and whole streets gathered round like it was a block party. People here didn't wait for permission to celebrate. They made something out of nothing. Warmth from struggle, music from concrete, joy from the noise of everyday life. That was Moss Side. Tough, loud, and full of heart. Hulme was something else entirely. It didn't look like the rest of Manchester, not then. Rows of old terraces had been torn down, and in their place stood the crescents, huge concrete blocks that looked modern for about 5 minutes, then started falling apart before anyone could figure out how to fix them. You'd step under those walkways and the sound changed, muffled, echoing like the air had been trapped. Kids used the balconies as football pitches, the courtyards filled with prams, dogs and bikes without chains. Some flats had leaks that never quite stopped, others had walls that froze in winter, but people made them work. It was cheap living, and that meant creativity found a home there. Students, artists, squatters, all packed into those strange, crumbling spaces. You'd hear guitars through thin walls, smell paint and burnt toast, and it felt like the kind of place where something unexpected could happen at any time. The council might have called it a failed experiment, but for a lot of people, Hulme was freedom. You could be broke and still live on your own terms. Nights spilled out onto the walkways. It was messy, noisy, and a bit mud, but somehow it worked. Oxford Road was where the city started to feel restless. The buses rattled past, packed with students, guitars poking out of bags, scarves flapping in the wind. You could spot the newcomers straight away, eyes wide, maps out, walking straight into the road. Cafes lined the stretch from the university down to the Palace Theatre, steam on the windows, the smell of burnt toast and instant coffee drifting out every time someone pushed the door open. Inside, half the tables were covered in sketchbooks and lecture notes, the other half in empty mugs and cigarette ends. You'd pass pubs that felt more like second homes, the Salisbury, the Footage, the Union, each one buzzing by late afternoon. Students argued about films they hadn't seen, bands they swore were the next big thing, and some of them actually were. Small venues and basement bars gave the city its sound, raw, loud, and proud to be rough around the edges. It wasn't glamorous, but there was something electric about it. Everyone seemed to be trying something, starting bands. You could walk down Oxford Road on a rainy night, music spilling out of a doorway, and feel like the whole city was just waiting to happen. By the late 70s, Manchester had started to change its skin. The old markets and back streets were giving way to concrete and glass. The Arndale Centre was the big symbol of it all, huge, yellow-bricked, unapologetically modern. People called it the giant cheese grater, but they still went there every weekend. Inside it felt futuristic, escalators humming, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, an air that always smelled faintly of new plastic. Kids pressed their noses to toy shop windows. Teenagers hung around the record stores, pretending to browse, and mums compared prices at Littlewoods. It was all very new, very bright, very different from the drafty streets outside. But not everyone was convinced. The rebuilding meant old haunts were gone. Small shops, corner cafes, stalls that had been there for decades. People missed the noise and the familiarity of the markets. The Arndale was progress, but it didn't have much soul. Still, that's where Manchester was headed, a city trying to move on from its past, even if it wasn't sure what the future looked like yet. You could feel that tension in the air, half excitement, half nostalgia, like the place was still deciding what kind of city it wanted to be. If the Arndale was New Manchester, the markets were what people meant when they said the word home. Smithfield, the covered market, even the smaller outdoor stalls, that's where real life happened. You'd hear traders shouting prices before you even turned the corner, voices echoing through the damp air like a kind of music. It always smelled the same, a mix of fresh bread, frying onions, and something fishy from the next aisle over. The floors were wet, the air chilly, and you'd leave with your shopping bags cutting into your fingers, but feeling like you'd done the day properly. There were the characters everyone knew. The butcher with his banter, the old woman selling buttons, the fruit seller who always slipped an extra apple in for kids. You could spend hours wandering, chatting, buying nothing much, but coming away full anyway. By the late 70s, though, you could feel the change creeping in. New developments, new rules, fewer stalls. Some traders moved into shops, others packed up for good. But for those who remember it, the markets weren't just places to buy things, they were the heartbeat, noisy, chaotic, stubbornly human. You could lose half a day there without noticing the time, and somehow it never felt wasted. By the time evening rolled around, the city felt different. The rush had gone, shop shutters rattled down, and the streets took on that soft orange glow from the old sodium lamps. You could hear footsteps echo longer, buses sighing at the stops, and the faint hum of a jukebox spilling from a pub doorway. Pubs were their own world then, smoke curling up to low ceilings, pints clinking, laughter rolling in waves. You'd have office lads in their ties, factory workers with rolled up sleeves, students arguing about politics they didn't really understand. Everyone together, at least for a bit. The smell of chips drifted through every street by closing time. Couples walked arm in arm past the Piccadilly fountains, the night air cold, but not enough to chase him home yet. The city didn't need much to feel alive, just the sound of its people. If you caught the last boss out, you'd see it all blur through the window. The lights, the faces, the bits of old and new mixed together. That was Manchester in the 70s, rough around the edges, full of pride, and never still for long. And even now, when you think back, it's the small details that stick. The smell after rain, the sound of laughter echoing off wet stone, the feeling that somehow the city was yours.